Hi friends, welcome back. I'm very excited to do this video today. I thought about doing it for a while now, and today's that day. Our face is clean, we have our hair put up. Let's moisturize and let's get into it. So today's video is about books that have changed my life. My all-time favorite books. And there are 11 books on this list, and I can't wait to talk about them all. I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read them. So like the ones that I read as a child will be first. The first book I want to talk about is the Goosebump series by R.L. Stine and the Fear Street series by R.L. Stine as well. So I can remember being about 6 years old at a Walmart, and my father was buying me a Babysitter's Club book. My brother was buying a Goosebumps book, however, and I asked my dad, well, I want a Goosebumps book too. That looks fun. Why can't I have that? And he's like, oh, you're too young. That just made me want to read the book even more. So when I finally managed to get my hands on the book, I immediately fell in love with it, and that began my love of horror. And obviously back then it wasn't the type of horror that I read now as an adult, but you know, that was my first experience with scary books, and I freaking loved it. I remember in 5th grade, I won first prize in the science fair and got the cash prize, and one of the things I was most excited to buy with that was not one, but 2 Fear Street books. So, I mean, at 10 years old, I was already in love with horror. The next book I want to talk about is It by Stephen King. And again, I'm doing this by age. So I read Stephen King at a young age. I remember watching the movie It when I was 6, and my mother was a huge Stephen King fan and had basically all of his books. And at 8 years old, she let me read Stephen King's It, which, if you know the book, you know it's about kids that are going missing in this town and being killed by this thing that can shapeshift into their biggest fear. So, would not recommend it for a child to read. However, that book and reading it at 8 years old sealed my love of horror, and I never went back. I've been a Stephen King fan since then, since I first read a Stephen King book at 8 years old. So that definitely put me on the path to reading all the scary books that I do now and my love of horror. The third book I want to talk about is the Harry Potter series. This series came out when I was in the 5th grade. I was 10. It is what cemented my love of reading. It absolutely absorbed me in its world, and I think that was one of the first books that I truly got lost in. The 4th book is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, and that is my all-time favorite book. It has my all-time favorite quote, "The world was hers for the reading." This book is about a girl who grows up in the slums of Brooklyn, New York, and rises above it through her hard work and education and family bonds. And I think that was one of the first times I saw myself in a book. And it was a beautiful experience. Not only did I get lost in the book, but I got lost in the character. The 5th book on the list is True Prep by Lisa Birnbach and Chip Kidd. Now, True Prep is Lisa Birnbach's 2nd book. She wrote in the 80s a guide on being prep, and it's sarcastic. It's like an homage. It's not an actual how-to guide. It's just an homage. But this book, I read it in high school, and I wanted to become that type of person. That's who my idols were in high school. That's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be wearing the blazers and the dark academia and the pleated skirts and the boarding schools and yachts in the summer, all that good stuff. I wanted that life. I grew up nowhere near that type of life. So that book, it made me yearn for a life that I would have had no other access to. So that was an interesting experience. And I love that book for giving me that look at another world, a world that I would never have had access to if not for that book. Uh-oh. Really? Just dump powder out everywhere. That's fun. So the sixth book is the Six Tudor Queen series by Alison Ware. And she is a historian. She writes nonfiction. She also writes historical fiction. And I love all of her books. They're all so rich with history and with gossip and with facts, but they're told in such a way that is truly interesting. So I will preface this by saying this isn't what started my love of historical fiction, but it kind of cemented it. What started my historical fiction and Tudor England obsession was a book I read as a child, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was a book about famous ghosts, Abraham Lincoln, and one that stood out the most was the ghost of Anne Boleyn walking around a castle holding her head in her hand. That was horrifying to me as a child, and it stuck with me, and I became obsessed with learning about Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I, and then I learned about Henry VIII and all of his other wives, and just became absolutely engrossed with this story, and it is absolutely fascinating. So Alison Ware definitely has to get the mention for cementing my love of historical fiction, because those books, that series, all of her books really are amazing, just simply amazing. The seventh book is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, this is another book that it exposed me to a world that I would otherwise not have had access to, which can't that be said about all books, really? Isn't that the point of books in the end? But in this book, there's a girl, Elizabeth Gilbert, does not conform to society's standards and rules, and she gets divorced from her husband and decides to spend a year finding herself. And she does this by going to Italy, basically doing what she wants to do just for the sheer joy of it. She's trying to find joy again in her Italian experience. She goes to India to her yogi's retreat, and there she learns to love not only herself, but to love a higher power and to reach out to that higher power. Then she goes to, I want to say, an island somewhere in Malaysia, but she goes to an island, and there she learns about loving everyone and everything and opening herself up to the richness of love that the world has to offer. So this journey teaches her to love herself, to love a higher power, and then to love everyone. That book showed me the power of loving yourself and loving others, and it was a great reading experience. The eighth book is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you remember me saying that I'm doing these books in the order that I read them, then you'll understand I read The Hobbit as an adult. I have never been a fantasy fan. That was never my thing. Again, my thing was horror. I loved horror. I read Stephen King when I was 8, and that just cemented my love of horror. I was never big into fantasy. However, my husband made me watch Lord of the Rings. Then he made me watch The Hobbit. Well, then I wanted to read The Hobbit. And that was it. That's when I became a true blue adventure journey fantasy fan. Not all fantasy, but especially when it comes to journeys and elves and stuff like that. That's my jam. I love it. I will always love horror more, but that opened me up to learning about fantasy and realizing that that's another genre that I like. So that was interesting. The 9th book is, and some of you are going to laugh, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And this book changed my life because I've always loved organization and decluttering. I love going through boxes and closets and drawers and digging everything out and seeing what's in there, because I always find stuff that I'd forgot I had. And it's almost like a treasure search. Well, Marie Kondo teaches it in her book that it's a joy. It can be a form of self-care and self-love to take care of your things in your space in such a way that your space is clean and tidy and you have room for the things in your life that you love, like hobbies and books and things like that. If you don't have space for it because your space is so cluttered with things that you don't love, then you'll never have room in your life for the things that you do love. So seeing it as a form of self-love and self-care, it took it to a new place for me. And I still fold my clothes and towels the way that she suggests, and it drives my husband crazy. But I love opening up a drawer and seeing all my shirts or all of my jeans folded up envelope style, and I can see everything I own at a glance. And it just makes me so happy. And it might be ridiculous, but it's just something that makes me so happy to be able to open a drawer and see everything all laid out so nice and neat instead of being a jumbled mess. Number 10 is How to Keep House While Drowning by Casey Davis. And this is a newer book that I've read in the past 2 years or so. And it's about how doing the basics of housekeeping is also a form of self-love and self-care. It's just doing the bare minimum to keep your space healthy as a form of self-care. If you can't do it to perfection, that's okay. And I was always raised, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing right. And anything less than perfection is failure. Well, this book is talking about do the bare minimum. If that's all you can do, that's great. Do that bare minimum. Do what you have to do to keep the bugs away. Do the dishes when you're ready. Do the mopping when you're ready. Take care of yourself. Not cleaning to perfection, not doing it 100%. That's okay. That's okay. It's not self-love to push yourself. It is self-love to take a step back, do what you can when you can, and in the meantime, figure out a way to safely get by. That book really opened my eyes. Because again, I was raised with the perfection mentality, and I still struggle with that. The last book on the list, and hear me out on this one, is Paris the Memoir by Paris Hilton. Now, you may be wondering, how in did a celebrity memoir change my life? This book opened my eyes in a lot of different ways. Let's talk about it. First of all, I learned things about Paris Hilton, and yes, I get that this book was written by Paris in her words about herself. Of course, she's going to put the best positive spin on herself. Duh. However, I learned things that I didn't know. For instance, that high-pitched, childlike voice that you think of when you think of her, that's not her real voice. That is a character that she's acting as. And she's selling herself as a product to the media. And it's worked for her. So, you know, whatever works. I also learned that despite her family's millions, she had an incredibly traumatic childhood. When she was an adolescent, her parents literally had her kidnapped and took to a reform school camp to a center for troubled teens where they promised to change the course that these adolescents were headed on, and instead they used abuse and isolation and starvation and just torture to get these adolescents whipped into shape. And Paris has started speaking out about this because obviously her parents didn't know that she was being abused. Now as an adult, she's able to speak out about it and save other teens from the same experience that she went through. And she's really leading this cause for change and educating people about what these youth detention center places are really like. They're not good. They don't change the child and help them get on a better path. They simply torture and beat down the child until they give in. And if that's what you want your child to experience, well, okay, but most parents sending their child to these places don't understand that that's the reality of these places. So I learned about that, and it gave me a new perspective on somebody that I had always just kind of written off as just a blonde bimbo, basically. Sorry, Paris. But it gave me a new perspective on her. And then taking it a step further, it opened my eyes to don't judge a book by its cover. Just because somebody portrays themselves in a certain way, or because you think this about a person because of how they dress or talk or whatever, you don't know their story. You don't know what they've experienced. Until you've walked a mile in somebody's shoes, you really have no right to judge them because you don't know the things that they've been through. So that was a profound moment for me to realize that about her and how much it changed my view of her. But here's the final look. So thanks for listening to me talk about the books that have changed my life, my all-time favorite books. Each of these books have had a profound effect on me in one way or another, whether they've opened my eyes to how I view the world, or how I view myself, or just a new way of doing things, or simply opening my eyes to a new genre that I discovered I liked. These books have changed me, and because of that, these are some of my all-time favorite books. And I hope you read them, and I hope they impact you too. And if they do, please leave a comment below letting me know, and let me know what books have changed you. What books have impacted your life? Let me know. So thanks for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!